Everybody, so today is December 1st, which is a very special day in our family, but it is also the last day of the Thanksgiving holiday break that I got from work. I got to have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off, which was pretty cool. Um, right now, what's going on is I have created, so basically, what I've created is the ability to like basically from 30,000 feet, you can you can configure different values. And one of the values, but one of the things I decided in this round for some reason, it was I wanted to add validation. So it would basically prevent you from writing um, some code. But then it was kind of, or writing a invalid thing. And then while I was doing it, I was like, well, it'd be nice if you type in something invalid, that it like replaced it when instead of leaving it broken, just it replaces it with the last valid value and gives you like a little information icon, which is like that. And then the information icon has information that it will be useful. But there was one specific scenario where I thought you would go from an invalid state to a valid state. And that was if you put like if I wanted to write point 0.6 in and put in a point in here, I want it to be able to stay invalid. And then when I type in the 6. So I went through all these different sorts of things, and it was quite the journey to learn validation. I knew it was going to be hard because validation um, is like one of those things that just seems super easy when it's easy to explain in a way where people understand what you're talking about, but it's very difficult to actually nail down all the details. And I knew that was going to be a case, and that was kind of one of the things I wanted to get out of this set of videos was like a deeper understanding, so that like if I'm talking to people in the future and they're pitching validation, I can kind of throw out easily look back at what I went through and remember things and say, oh, okay, these are the things we got to watch out for. And you want to do that in a good way, or you just kind of seem like a crazy person talking. There was this movie called 12 Monkeys that, like, where this dude keeps time traveling and he's trying to explain to people things, but it's very, very difficult. I swear that's what it feels like being a computer programmer all the time. It's a good movie for a lot of people. Most people that I've known that were like accountants or computer programmers or or like attorneys, where there's like these vagaries that are behind the scenes, and then you trying to explain things to people and all that. Like that movie seems to resonate with them, but most people don't really like that movie very much. So, anyways, it's a good movie though, and Brad Pitt's in it, and Bruce Willis is in it, and it. Brad Pitt is absolutely hilarious in that movie. He plays a crazy person, and then Bruce Willis plays a very, very sane person who's in a crazy situation. And the way those two bounce off of each other is hilarious. But, anyways, so what I have now is for validate fog density. So, for this one, what happens is this gets called, and it's a whole thing on how this gets called, but let's just focus on valid this function because we don't have to really understand everything to understand it. And that's kind of the point of breaking things down into smaller segments is if at the end the goal is to make it to where you can just focus on one small piece. If you write a function and then you have to go back and look at all the other functions to figure out what that function does, then that goal wasn't achieved. If you write a function and now you don't have to think about any of those other pieces, then that was achieved. That's one of the many goals of writing methods. But anyway, so I'm going to write a method and a function. They aren't exact synonyms, but they're the same thing, which is weird. It's just like kind of the context. One of them is in context of an object, and one of them is all by itself. So that's a weird thing. But right now, so I have this variable called is overwrite false, and then down here I check to see if it's false. But there's really no reason for this function, which is currently 28 to, what is it? No, that was 83, line 283 to 318. So it's like 318, 18 and 17, 35. So it's 35 lines, and we could probably, 50 is really to me the upper limit of, ideal for a function slash method. But and we can do a pretty good job of reducing it to this, and then you don't have to understand why something is overwritable or not. And then if you're working on overwriting, you don't really have to understand how it gets called from this function. So I'm going to create a function, and the most important thing when you're creating a new function is to name it in a way that helps with the understanding of it. And so the name of this function is going to be check for overwrite exception. So if you're reading this function and it's going to return a boolean, and you're looking at the title of it, it's that it's probably to check something, and so, and then that what it's checking is probably an exception, and then overwrite is the kind of exception. So it's a kind of exception. So these are like a verb, check for. It's going to check for something, and then the thing it's going to check for is an overwrite exception. Now, when you look at the first argument name, I'm just going to name it value, and that is going to be a string. So that we're checking for an exception. The exception probably is not the value, and then we're going to pass in, it looks like validation tokens. And that's kind of a bummer because it's not really particularly, like, I guess this is actually a bit confusing because, and I don't know why it bothers me, but I'm just going to say return false for the moment, just so that it quits complaining up here. So the thing is that this validation tokens, I guess the naming is pretty good because we know it's not over. Like if it was overwrite tokens or something like that, it would be kind of kind of thing, kind of a mess. But it would be kind of confusing. But there definitely is not enough information in the name, the title, this value, and this to determine exactly what this does. And it is super nice if you can actually read the name of the method, the arguments, and what it returns, and know exactly what happens. That really is like a really good goal to strive for when you're writing method names. Now, at this point, it's always a good idea to name the variable that you're going to return. And it's really in general like 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, definitely more than 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 times, or 4 and 3, 2 and 3, or 3 and 4 and 5 times. It's at least 9 times out of 10, but probably more like 90, closer to 99 times out of 100. It's really good to have a single entry point and a single exit to a function. That people can argue for hours and hours of that, and there are definitely a few exceptions, but the vast majority of the time, like, you would actually be better served to mess it up the few times that you would mess it up. Like if you're and just do whatever it takes to return, have one entry and one exit point. You're better off and then the few times that you would be better off having multiple exits, you would be better off just the 99 times just getting it right than the one time getting it wrong, you know. So if you're going to have a single rule, like if you have to have one single rule that you follow by, I would definitely follow the one entry, one exit. Like I said, there are a few exceptions where you're slightly better off probably with a single return. And typically, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be, if you are better off, it's going to be like this. Return. Like something right at the beginning. And then otherwise, you're going to do all these other things. But you could also do this if and then else. Or just if and then, or if not, whatever, and then do all your functioning and then return false. But anyways, what I would like rather do is name a variable. So, and usually this variable up here that is the right variable name. So we're going to say hat, and it probably is wrong because that's sort of like is overwrite. Well, maybe is overwrite value. Is overwrite. Actually, that should be exception. So basically, we want to return if whether it's an overwrite, whether the value is a, and maybe it'd be better to do that, is value overwrite exception. I think that does bring this whole thing together. Now we know exactly what this thing does, and it's probably better if we come back here and, while it means absolutely nothing from a practical perspective, it sort of hammers in the point, is value overwrite exception. Okay, so basically we're asking, hey, is this value an overwrite exception? Now, const is an array of exception values. And these exception values, and I wish I had strongly typed that. So let's go here and see if I strongly typed it over here. Okay, it's just a string. Okay. So the exception values are strings. Let's go get out of this view. So we're going to have our exception values, and that is a list of strings. And that comes from this function. No. That comes from this function. Get overwrite exceptions for tokens. But the thing is we have multiple validation tokens, so we actually have to get that for each individual token, not for a single one. So basically we're going to iterate over our validation tokens. And we are going to have a every one of these is going to be a validation token, which is of type validation token types, which I don't even know if that was ended up being a good name, but you know, it is what it is. And then, so now we're going through each validation token. So now we can get our exception values. And then this is where you kind of have to think, okay, so do I want to break this down into another standalone function, or do I want to leave it? Like, am I better off with the context around it? Does that make this easier to understand? Or would it be easier if I broke this out so that the whole process of dealing with exception values is easier to understand? And that's always a tough thing, and it can change. It can be very simple at first and then be better to break it out later. There's just no telling. So now I have a list of exception values, so I need to iterate over those. Oh, excuse me. Sorry about that. Boy, that's probably way worse than my new higher resolution, higher sound videos. So I apologize for that. I should have muted. Um, I have to practice that. But anyway, so I have a collection of exception values, so I need to loop over each of those. Now, in this specific case, I only have one, but having that knowledge isn't of any use whatsoever. So exception. And that is the string. And we are going to compare that exception value. So we're going to say is validate exception. And see, so we could do something like this, right? Equals, and then we could say exception value triple equals value. Right? So basically that'll be either true or false, and then that but actually that doesn't work for us, and I always have to relearn this. I think I even before in this video series, um, because I only want it to be a one-way street. I don't want to set it to whatever that is because I'm iterating. If any one of them is equal to any, uh, if any exception value is true, I want it to stay true. I want it to be a one-way street. I mean, if two of them are true and it gets set to true twice, that's fine. But is okay. So if the exception value is that, then is true. So, anyways, just over years, I figured out that this is the easiest way to sort of like. A lot of times, people will try to go like if this is true, else this is false. But if it's not true, they'll start adding all this logic. It's just like it's no big deal if you set it to true multiple times. Um, Now, back in the day with the regular for loops, you could break out. Once it's true, you could break out and you could save some cycles. That is not really the case for the for each, which, you probably don't want to use for each if there's going to be like sometimes you might need to iterate over thousands of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of things. And so you want to just break out as soon as you find one, uh, not just keep looping and all that. But this works fine for this. And then is value exception. So we're just going to return that. So basically, if it finds any, it's going to set this to true. Like I said, maybe it makes sense to break this off into its own function too. But I don't think that it is that much mental cognitive load for this, so I would not, or I'm not going to. So now if I come back and it's just like I have to do something in here and it's just really, really hard to understand, I'll probably break it down. But I don't think it will be. So let's just make sure we didn't break it. That still works. Point still works. Making it right still works. Okay, so now we've broken this guy out into its own function. So this is a one-liner. We can just do a quick compare of the code. So, and rename that. Something does not seem right here. Oh, I never did get rid of. I never actually used the function. So, yeah, of course it still works. So let's just take this down, comment it all out. Go to this dot. And then current value is our value, and let's see, validation tokens. And so we'll know that's wrong if that's... Okay, let's try that. Now let's see if it's... Now we can actually check our stuff. See if it works. Okay, so that still works. That still works. Okay, so we definitely have gotten that. So let's go ahead and look at our code, do a code comparison. So basically this from 290 to 303 is gone. We renamed it because is value overwrite value. Oh, so that's still wrong. It should be is value overwrite exception. So if it's an override exception, we're gonna do this. So we're saying if it's none, like there was no validation issues, or it's an override exception, then do this code. To me, that's very, very straightforward. This code, check for overwrite exception. Okay, I think I understand what the intention of this is. It takes a value, and it takes some validation tokens. Okay, that doesn't quite make sense. And then is value override exception is we're going to default it to false. We're going to go over all the validation tokens, and then we're going to get a list of exception values. Oh, okay, so that kind of makes sense between these two. We have exception values, and now we're going to check everything at exception value. Is it perfectly understandable, perfect 100%? Probably not. We could probably make it a little bit more understandable by breaking things out a little bit more. Is it worth it? Probably not. Now, if we worked in a place and we're doing this code and we had to do like really thorough unit testing, then it probably is worth breaking this out into an even smaller function so that you can unit test all the different pieces of it. But in this scenario, I don't think it is. 22 minutes. That's pretty terrible. Anyways, happy coding, everybody. Bye.